Nicola, very nice to see you.
Lovely to see you too, Robert.
So you're my friend and my co-constellator, co-conspirator in Constellations.
We've known each other quite a while, actually.
Yeah,
I was
known each other quite a while. Yeah.
So.
And we thought we'd do this series of Constellations Conversations.
Yes.
And we thought we'd start with the art of representing. So maybe if I say something a little bit about what we mean even by the word representative or something, you can chip in, so we've got something to start from, and then maybe kind of give our ideas and thoughts about that, because it might not be obvious to everybody, but constellation, certainly when you do it in a live setting, involves having other people in the room representing aspects of an issue, essentially. So if I was doing a constellation, Nicola, and I had an issue, I might ask somebody in the group to represent, I don't know, my friend. And you, Nicola, represent my friend. You've never met this friend before, but suddenly you kind of become active with what that friend might be thinking or feeling. So it's a bit of a dark art. Some people confuse it with role play, but that's the sort of heart of representing, that people who don't know you very well are able to represent or embody or manifest people in your life, essentially. And that's one of the main benefits, really, of constellations, that you can see people kind of come alive in front of you. So that's a kind of basic way into it.
Yes, and I agree that when people are just coming to constellations, the things they get a little curious about is this acting? Is it role play? Is it something different? And I think we both would probably agree that acting is a skill. We know good actors, we know bad actors, so it's a very fine skill, and there's a little more of the personality. The personality somehow draws through something.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I was thinking recently at my, we run constellations workshop separately and sometimes together. It's often the case when somebody entirely new to constellations arrives and they're very worried about, will they be any good? Will I be a good representative or not? As though it is a skill like acting. And, I always say to them, don't worry, it'll just happen. And of course, they don't really believe it until they dive into it. But it's an interesting question, whether you need skill or not to be a representative. Obviously, you do to be an actor.
Yes, and I think it's, we think about how the representation begins, which is the issue holder, as we might say in the UK or Europe or in America, the seeker, is invited to choose someone to represent, as you just said, a friend, a parent, a sibling. And the person asked, actually, they have a choice. They can say yes or no.
Yeah.
And often, largely, they say yes, so they agree. So something happens in that moment. There's just a very light contract. For this period of time, I agree to represent your close friend where you want to explore this dynamic in your relationship.
Yes, I like that. The notion of a light contract. That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
And then I think, it normally works best if you don't know the person you're representing, because there's no preconceptions. And, I describe it to people, it's a little bit like, standing under a waterfall or more domestic image, a shower. You take a position and you let the representation sort of unfold around you. That's how it's different, I think, to acting, in the sense that it's something that happens to you by you almost doing nothing.
Yeah, I like the metaphor of the waterfall. There's something in it I'm not sure about, though, so let me sort of test this with you, because I think sometimes there's a fear on the part of particularly new representatives, that they will be consumed by this thing or possessed or taken over, and they'll lose touch with who they are. Like, it'll be very destabilizing, and they'll sort of be taken over by some sort of voodoo process. And so what I say to people is, look, Nicola, thank you for representing. Don't worry, you're going to carry on being Nicola, you will still have Nicola shaped thoughts and feelings. You might still be thinking about lunch or dinner or whatever. And at the same time, you will be experiencing what it's like to be somebody's friend that you've never met, or somebody's aunt, or somebody's boss, or whatever it is. Because the representing role doesn't remove the self. It's they coexist, or one is superimposed over the other, but you can always return to yourself at any moment. And certainly, well, that's what I tell new representatives anyway. So don't get freaked out. Yes, you will be embodying somebody else, but you will still be you beneath that. And I'm not exactly sure what the right metaphor is for that relationship. I love the idea of the waterfall, because it is like being saturated in it. But it would make me worry sometimes that for some new representatives, that might be a bit worrying as well. Like, am I going to get dissolved in this?
Yes, no. And so if we sort of change the metaphor a little bit,
Yeah,
it might be that you're invited to a dinner, and you walk in, you come, and they say, Robert, this is your place here, and you sit down, and there's a little place card holder which says, David's father. So in a
yeah,
way, it's because it's something smaller. You're still Robert, but just for the period of this constellation, you have to represent David's father. And of course, the constellation will end, and you'll get up from the dinner table, and you'll walk away, and you'll be Robert.
Yeah.
But you may have some experiences in that moment when you've agreed to sit in the place of David's father, which come to you sort of spontaneously.
Yeah, exactly. I like that. That's a very nice image for it. And makes me think, actually, there are times at the end of a constellation where a particular representative will sit down and say, do you know what? I can't shake this feeling off. I still feel I'm carrying the person I've just represented, and I want to sort of slough it off now, or shed that skin. So that does happen occasionally. And I know you do this and I do this. You give that representative the opportunity of, we call it derolling sometimes, which may be the wrong thing to call it, but it is a way of handing back the place card, really, or closing the door on the dinner party, isn't it?
Exactly. And I think, when does that happen? That's an interesting question.
Yeah.
I think it happens when there is some element of the role, if we call it, representation, that has resonance with the individual, or let's say their family's experience, their systemic experience. So there's a little bit of a something which has matched for a moment. And I always think that's a choice. The choice for the representative is, do I want to stay with this and just let it move within me and then dissolve? Or do I think, actually, enough's enough, that's fine, I've finished the constellation, I don't want to do that. And if that's the case, then we just deroll them. And I don't know about you, but it doesn't happen that often when I do constellations. It's quite occasional. But it's nice to know that one has that opportunity to work with what the representative wants to do.
Yeah, no, I really like that. That sort of analysis. That's probably right, isn't it? The representative is activated. There's an alignment between what they're representing and their own history, issues, and so on, that creates that match, which they then carry over even after the constellation's finished. That's very interesting. It's also interesting to me that you get people at the other end of the spectrum, as it were, who have a completely different way of being around it. So the example we've just spoken about, which is, let's call it, I don't know what we'd call it, the entangled representative or something, the person whose representation is activating something in them personally. If that's at one end of the spectrum, and they become very consumed with their representation. At the other end of the spectrum, paradoxically, maybe, there are people who become equally consumed with the representation. I've seen people who've represented, murderers and villains and the worst of human nature. And at the end, they'll just go, oh, yeah, that was interesting. And they'll sit down.
Yes.
It's like a light switch almost, or on and off. They carry nothing.
Some post-its are more sticky than others.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's interesting. And that takes us a little bit to the idea that another concern people have about representations is that they won't be able to feel anything. They won't be able
Yeah.
to be useful to, the issue holder or seeker. And so that is also something that when we're constellating, that I think we sometimes have to help people to get over.
Mm.
That they've been invited for a reason. So the issue holder has used their intuition and has thought, okay, this person would be great for David's father. And they've agreed. So that like contract has been established. And then it's really a kind of an unfolding. And also, because I think this is another point, is that it's a spatial holding, as well as something that might have verbal contributions.
Yeah.
So I think that's quite interesting, because what's coming through their body, where they choose to stand, there's a lot that can be given through a representative that doesn't have to be about their verbal comments.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good shout, actually. There are people who come in and say, well, I don't feel very much, or they're worried they won't feel very much. As a rule of thumb, I err on the side of thinking that is actually data from the system, from the person they're representing. And there is something about the person they're representing who doesn't feel very much for whatever reason. It might be a defensive thing. They don't want to feel because it's too painful to feel. They suffer from a kind of, what's sometimes called in psychotherapy kind of flattened affect, which is that they, their ability to articulate their feelings just isn't really there. Or it may be in a kind of extreme cases, at least I've noticed this, I wonder if you have actually, that sometimes the people who feel nothing and they're getting quite heavy, again, that there is something to do with death in that system. There is a kind of dead presence in that system which kind of needs to be called out in some way. So I've kind of seen different ways of working with that.
Yes. And I think, sometimes there's also an exclusion that's going on. So the exclusion kind of starts from the beginning, in the sense that the representative's a bit unsure about coming in, or they're sort of uncertain. And we normally, I think, probably do the same, which is we ask the representative, just check whether there's a yes or a no. And there can be a personal no, I don't want to do that representation, or there can be that hesitancy, as you say, kind of really about competency. But on the other hand, if we take another angle, is that sometimes people in a constellation group say, as soon as the issue holder started talking about the dynamic in their family and who the primary people were, I knew they were going to choose me for this particular representation.
Yes, it's startling actually how often that happens. If people get up and say, I knew I was going to be asked. Yeah. Exactly. Yes, that's true. I like you, I suspect, I don't actually get to do representing much these days because I'm always in the constellating role. But I do love representing. Maybe a point I'll come back to, but I remember representing a long time ago this man, and I kind of had this experience, and it wasn't so much that I didn't feel anything, but I just felt this kind of overwhelming sense of darkness inside me. It's like I couldn't see inside myself. It's a very odd feeling. The kind of reading of that, which I buy really, was that this was a man who had no self-knowledge of any kind, and that was sort of the issue, that he was completely unaware of his impact on other people. He wasn't necessarily malevolent or benevolent for that matter, but just completely unable to read his own place in relation to other people. So that was a very odd, very, very odd situation. It was as if there was, it was like darkness within. Yeah. And I think part of the conclusion was, this man needs to spend some time, finding himself. It was, he was a middle-aged person, so it was kind of long overdue, but it was a kind of fascinating experience.
we were talking in a way a little bit about representations I've known and loved.
Yeah.
And in a way, I think one of the fantastic things about representing is that you have this insight momentarily for a period of time into often another culture, another world, another life experience. And I don't know about you, but I've personally just found that really expanding.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I absolutely love representing. And I think one of the reasons I like it so much is it's a relief from my own bloody ego, because most of the time, I'm like many people, I'm there, with my own thoughts going around in my head, my worries, my concerns, my anxieties, my, all the rest of it. And for that period when you are representing somebody else, all of that is, if not completely dropped, it's very much on the back burner.
Yeah.
And I think just the relief from being Robert, I mean, it's it's a gift that I would wish on anybody, actually.
It's true. Actually, just having your personality be quiet.
Yeah.
Because in a sense, you a little bit leave some of your personality on the chair when you step up and walk into the circle and represent.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. It's a relief not being me.
Yeah. I wonder in that respect if it's, I hadn't made this connection before, you've helped me to make it, whether it's like sort of meditation in a way, because you are quietening the you or the ego or the self or whatever, and other things, you are present to something else, which isn't, you're not normally present to.
I think you're absolutely right, because you have a kind of expanded connection.
Mm.
So something in you quietens down in order for something else to have a little bit more volume or visibility, and it is, I think, that connection to humanity.
Yes, I'm going to make a very highfalutin connection now here, and Nicola, you know me and know just how pretentious I am, but I'm going to go for it.
So I can capture it. Yeah.
Okay, and then we'll let our audience go perhaps fairly soon. But I love this kind of metaphor you did. As part of us quietens down, the other part becomes more open to others, and it made me think of Plato, actually, in his theory of knowledge, which basically says kind of all knowledge is available to all of us all of the time, but we kind of have to, this is not Plato's word, but we have to kind of get out of our own way. Yeah. Now, his technical phrase for it is anamnesis, which is Greek, obviously, and means unforgetting, because most of the time we're in a state of forgetting all the knowledge that's out there, and we kind of have to do that in order to function, kind of. But once we begin unforgetting, then all that stuff comes back to us. I loved your sort of elevator going up as the other one came down kind of thing. I mean, maybe in another episode, we'll talk about, the field and where this data comes from. Yes. But it does remind me of that sense that actually everything is kind of available to me if I can just turn off the internal radio.
Yes. And I think that's why I often say to people, if you're tired of life, come to a constellation workshop, because you will feel that sense of connection. And I love the term, the unforgetting.
It's nice, isn't it?
It's a more kind of essential remembering.
Exactly. That's right. Well, maybe that's a good place to kind of pause this on with the notion of unforgetting and essential remembering. Nice chatting to you, Nicola.
Same here, Robert. Always good. And we'll meet again.
We'll meet again. And do please follow us on our websites, NicolaDunnConstellations.com. I think that's right, isn't it?
Yeah.
RobertRowlandSmith.com. And you can find information there about courses and trainings and workshops that Nicola's running, that I'm running, and we'll be delighted to be in contact with you through those channels.
And we look forward to sharing with you again.